Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm Ian Malcolm. I'm President and CEO at Lumency. Thank you for making the time to spend with us today. This is our sixth annual Global Sponsorship Trends Briefing, all done virtually. It's our 12th annual Global Sponsorship Trends Report that we will get into your email boxes before the end of the week. Today's session is a short briefing on global sponsorship trends heading into 2026. It's grounded in Lumency's ongoing client work, reliable industry data sets, and our research in partnership with the World Federation of Advertisers. The goal isn't to predict the future or prescribe tactics. It's to surface the pressures and shifts we're seeing consistently across mature sponsorship organizations and what those shifts mean for how sponsorship is increasingly expected to perform from leadership at brand owner side organizations. This lens is for today's trends is through the brand owner lens. We do have property partners and competitors. We have other industry folks that are joining today, but this is certainly through the brand owner lens. Our content should run about 35 minutes. We'll leave about 10 or so minutes for any questions at the end and have you on your way, hopefully no later than 15 minutes after the hour. Please contribute any questions in the Q&A box, and we will endeavor to get to those during the Q&A period. What we also get to you after today is we will send you a link to a playback of the recording of this session. We will send you a link to the audio, which will be hosted on Spotify for this session. We will send you the written trends report, which should be with you by Friday. And we will also send you a copy of the Lumency and World Federation of Advertisers industry report that released in December. Many on the call may already have a copy of that, but we will make sure you get a copy. But thanks for joining. We like to say sponsorship is messy. Anyone that works in it can connect with that. It cuts across markets, channels, partners, internal teams. There are a few initiatives across a brand owner organization that have as many stakeholders involved. It sits at the intersection of brand, commercial, cultural objectives, and over time, layers get added faster sometimes than clarity. What we focus on with our clients is bringing structure and clarity into that complexity, not by oversimplifying sponsorship because it is complex, but by making it more manageable, more comparable, and easier to explain internally. That lens, clarity over chaos, is what underpins the trends we will be walking through today. Just a couple of slides on us in case they're newcomers to Lumency here. Everything we do is focused on helping brand owners bring clarity to sponsorship complexity. I mentioned that in the last slide. Our work spans the full sponsorship cycle, from strategy and portfolio architecture through valuation and negotiations to activation planning, governance, and measurement. A core part of that is rights management and performance evaluation, making sure sponsorships are structured, activated, and assessed in ways that stand up internally at brand owner side organizations. We also support this work with proprietary SaaS tooling designed specifically for brand side teams to improve consistency, comparability, and decision confidence. The reason I'm sharing this context up front is simple. The trends we're about to walk through aren't theoretical. They're grounded in what we repeatedly see across sponsorship portfolios we support globally. We do work across 21 different country markets. We are brand owner side only. We don't work for properties. We don't work for other intermediaries. We feel we can bring the best value to the conversation with clients by bringing unbiased advice and working brand side only. We're proud of the clients we do work with, and we have good reps in. Over the last 10 years, we've evaluated over 3,000 different kinds of sponsorships, be they sport, arts, culture, cause, music, community, athlete, entertainers, cross-promotional brand partnerships, and we touch a little over 300 tier 1 properties globally. So let's get into the trends, but let's get to the context first. I want to start by grounding this in scale. Global sponsorship investment now exceeds $120 billion USD annually. It is continues to grow at high single digits, outpacing other forms of marketing. That makes sponsorship a material marketing channel, not a niche or discretionary line item. For many brand owner organizations, sponsorship and activation together represent between 10 and 12% of total marketing communication spend. That's an average across brand owners globally. That obviously varies by organization. That's a meaningful share of spend comparable to other channels that already operate under tighter scrutiny. What's important is that across mature brand portfolios, investment levels are broadly stable. We're not seeing widespread pullback as we saw through the pandemic, and certainly for a couple of years afterwards. The story here isn't contraction. Instead, as sponsorship has reached this level of scale and stability, expectations around performance and accountability continue to rise. Leadership is asking clearer questions about value, effectiveness, and return, and sponsorship is increasingly expected to answer them with the same rigor as other major marketing investments. So let's get to the trends. What follows isn't a list of tactics or predictions. These are patterns we're seeing consistently across mature sponsorship organizations from a brand owner perspective, across portfolios, markets, and categories. Each trend reflects where pressure is concentrating and how expectations around sponsorship are changing as investment scales. We'll move through these fairly quickly. I'll try and speak quickly, but move quickly without speaking quickly. Not to my colleague Ryan Dunnigan for that charm, focusing on what's changing, what's driving it, and what it means to brand owners and the organizations they support. So trend number one, that sponsorship enters an optimization cycle. At a high level, sponsorship is coming under increasing pressure to perform in brand owner organizations, both efficiently and effectively. That pressure isn't only about which sponsorships brands choose, it's expanding into how those sponsorships are governed, activated, and managed day to day. As investment has scaled and stabilized, expectations have risen alongside it. Leadership's tolerance for ambiguity has declined. What we're seeing is less patience for waste, less patience for underperformance or unclear value, even when the strategic intent behind the sponsorship may be sound. When we look at the data underneath this shift, a few things stand out. First, investments themselves are broadly stable. I mentioned that earlier. This isn't a story about sponsorship being cut or deprioritized across mature portfolios, but mature portfolios are mature. There may not be room for new things. The focus on what's working becomes more important. What is changing is the focus away from expansion and toward efficiency and performance within existing commitments. At the same time, performance assessment hasn't kept pace with the scale of investment. Many organizations still struggle to evaluate sponsorships consistently and comparatively across their portfolio. What this adds is that optimization expectations now extend across the full sponsorship cycle. The primary source of performance risk is less about choosing the wrong sponsorships and more about how sponsorships are governed and executed. As a result, performance narratives are facing greater scrutiny at renewal moments. Leadership increasingly wants to understand not just what was sponsored, but how well it performed and why. Where performance clarity is limited, that pressure increases even when sponsorship is broadly aligned to brand strategy. So that is trend number one, the era of optimization. Trend number two, fewer platforms and deeper integration. What we're seeing next is a clear move towards concentration. Sponsorship investment is increasingly focused on fewer platforms rather than spread thinly across many. A key driver of that shift is omni-channel integration. Platforms that can integrate cleanly across markets, across channels, and across functions are becoming more valuable, and that capability is shaping consolidation decisions. At the same time, growing portfolio complexity is straining execution capacity within brand owner organizations and amongst those responsible for sponsorship. As a result, scale and repeatability are being prioritized over breadth to optimize that resource allocation. When we look at the indicators behind this shift, a few patterns show up consistently. On average, brands now invest across two or more sponsorship categories, be that sports, arts, music, culture, or community, for example, which has increased complexity across portfolios. At the same time, activation and rights management are often fragmented across teams, agency partners, and other partners, making integration harder to execute in practice. Brand owners consistently cite execution and integration as limiting factors, not a lack of ideas or a lack of ambition. As a result, multi-market platforms that can support consistent activation and integration are increasingly favored in future investment plans. What it means in practice is that portfolio architecture itself becomes a performance lever. Concentrating investment across fewer platforms increases the upside when those platforms perform, but it also increases downside risk when they don't. As a result, underperforming platforms face much sharper scrutiny because of that scale and because there are fewer places to hide performance gaps. And critically, omnichannel integration, we'll mention that a few times in our discussion today, omnichannel integration capability becomes a gating criteria for investment. Can we execute this platform across our connections mix? If we can't, let's consider different choices. Platforms are no longer evaluated only on strategic fit, but on whether they can scale and integrate effectively across the broader marketing system. Trend number 2. Trend number 3, activation effectiveness becomes the value driver. We're going to speak a lot about omnichannel and about activation today. What we're seeing here is growing performance variance between sponsorships that on paper look very similar. Comparable rights packages are delivering materially different outcomes at the same time, and that variance is increasingly explained by execution quality. In other words, activation effectiveness is outweighing rights selection as the primary driver of results. Despite this, activation ownership often remains fragmented across organizations, which makes consistent execution difficult and compounds performance variance. What this means is that value creation risk has shifted decisively towards activation effectiveness. Even strong strategy underperforms if execution is inconsistent or fragmented. As portfolios concentrate, activation becomes a real constraint on overall performance, not a downstream consideration. And as rights costs continue to rise, as we've seen, we've talked in a content piece recently about our belief that we're hitting the top of a rights cycle in terms of economics of viability on increasing rights fees. But as those rights costs continue to rise across global markets, capability gaps in activation increasingly limit the return brands are able to generate from those investments. That would be our trend number 3. So trend number 4, the measurement gap is now a strategic risk. We've seen in any market research we've done over the last number of years, that gap between organizations' intent and their behavior towards measurement has certainly shifted, and that the window or the gap is closing, but there's still some room to move. What we're seeing here is a gap between capability and adoption. Measurement capability in sponsorship exists, but it's not applied consistently across the marketplace. At the same time, or even within brand owner organizations across properties. At the same time, sponsorship is increasingly evaluated alongside other marketing channels that already operate under standardized KPIs and accepted KPIs and under accountability expectations from leadership within brand owner organizations. As those expectations rise, avoiding measurement becomes harder to justify. Despite that, emotional, political, and relationship-driven factors can still influence decision-making, often keeping measurement a lower priority that the scale of investment would suggest. In more blunt terms, let's not measurement because we may not like the answer because we may have made this investment through an emotional, political-driven decision matrix. The indicators here are pretty stark. Around 75, this data is coming directly from our recent WFA Lumency industry report. Around 75% of brand owners cite ROI measurement as their top sponsorship challenge. At the same time, sponsorship represents roughly 10 to 12% of overall marketing budgets, making it a material exposure, as we discussed earlier, from a ratio of spend perspective. Despite that, less than 1% of sponsorship budgets are typically allocated towards measurement, which is lacking, particularly in contrast to other marketing channels routinely allocating closer to 3% to measurement, highlighting that the gap is not about feasibility, but about priorities, incentives, and governance within brand owner organizations. What this means is that measurement gaps increasingly signal weak governance at the moments that matter the most. Performance narratives face the most pressure at renewals and when trade-offs are required across channels or across markets. Without credible measurement, even real value becomes harder to defend internally. As a result, scrutiny increases, sometimes even when sponsorship is performing well, simply because the performance story isn't clearly articulated to leadership, to other stakeholders, or across the organization. Trend number 5 in our top trend, our 10 global sponsorship trends for 2026. Data shifts from pilot to plumbing across the sponsorship landscape. What's changing here is how sponsorship data is being treated. Increasingly, data is viewed less as a campaign output and more as infrastructure that supports ongoing audience relationships. We're talking data here. We're talking about consumer data, zero-party, first-party data. The value is shifting away from one-off campaign results towards durable data assets that can be reused and compounded over time. That means data capture needs to be a significant aspect of sponsorship investment, and it needs to be designed into partnerships upfront, not added after the fact. In an optimization environment, one-off pilots and disconnected activations simply don't scale and simply don't satisfy leadership. We're seeing this shift reflected across the broader marketing landscape. First and zero-party data are now priorities across most marketing functions as access to third-party data becomes more difficult and continues to decline. Sponsorship is structurally well positioned here. Fan experiences and community context consistently deliver higher opt-in and intent rates than passive media does. Despite that, sponsorship generated data often remains campaign bound rather than treating it as a durable asset. And in many organizations, many brand owner organizations, that data has limited integration with CRM and core marketing systems, which constrains its long-term value. What this means is that sponsorship data value is increasingly determined upstream. The critical decisions happen at the point of deal design and activation planning, not downstream at reporting level. When data is treated as infrastructure, sponsorship can become a durable source of audience insight and addressability that compounds over time. When it isn't, even high engagement results in episodic metrics, even high engagement results in episodic metrics are missed opportunities. This shift is about asking not what did this activation deliver around sponsorship, but what data asset did this partnership create, who owns it, and how will it be used in the future. Trend number 6, cultural relevance becomes a portfolio design principle. Sport continues to anchor sponsorship portfolios because of its scale, reach, and cultural power. What is changing is how brand owners think about the range of cultural contexts in which they participate from a sponsorship portfolio perspective. To complement sport-led platforms, brands are increasingly incorporating additional culture passion points, including music, arts, lifestyle, gaming, and community. These platforms extend relevance into different moments, different mindsets, and modes of participation, particularly across younger audiences. That shift isn't away from sport. That doesn't shift us away from sport, rather, but toward broader cultural presence across a portfolio, particularly as younger consumers, Gen Z and Gen Alpha following, are consuming sport much differently. And music for Gen Z is really an identity connection for Gen Z in ways that it wasn't for previous generations. The indicators behind this shift are showing up clearly in portfolio mix. Sports still dominates sponsorship investment, historically accounting for the majority of total spend across the globe. That varies by country market. And particularly when you get down to the country market level and global spend is taken out, that ratio of sport to other diminishes to some extent. At the same time, brand portfolios have diversified. Most now invest across 2 or more sponsorship categories. We mentioned this earlier, reflecting deliberate expansion beyond sport alone. What we're also seeing is increased investment in cultural ecosystems, including music, arts, lifestyle, gaming, and community platforms that offer different modes of engagement and different modes of expression for a brand. Importantly, these investments are additive. They're being used to extend cultural relevance, not to replace sport as the backbone of sponsorship portfolios into 2026. What this means is that cultural relevance becomes a portfolio design decision, not a one-off activation choice. Sport continues to anchor scale and shared moments, but additional cultural platforms expand the range of contexts in which brands show up. For brand owners, the question shifts from should we be in sport or culture to what role does each platform play in reaching audiences across different cultural expressions and behaviors. Evaluating sport and non-sport assets through a lens that becomes essential in building a balanced, future-ready portfolio. Trend number 7, we're tracking. Women's sport moves from emerging to established growth lane, which impacts how brand owners are engaging and addressing it. Women's sport is moving through a clear inflection point. What was previously approached by many brand owners as experimental or values-led is increasingly being treated as a commercial growth category because of the performance of the space. Audience scale, media visibility, and sponsor interest have reached levels that change expectations. As a result, women's sport is no longer framed as a pilot or as adjunct. It's entering portfolios with rising performance and activation expectations from leadership. The data behind this shift is accelerating quickly. Pardon me. I've got my slides today. The data behind the shift is accelerating quickly. Across multiple leagues and events, audiences for women's sport have grown at double-digit rates over the past several years, across media consumption, across live audience, and across engagement. Sponsorship revenues from property side, women's sport properties rather, have scaled alongside that growth, with industry estimates indicating they've roughly tripled since 2022, which was 4 short years ago. At the same time, pricing discipline is increasing from those rights holders, and those rights holders are moving away from heavily discounted or purely values-led pricing towards clearer inventory, more succinct rate cards, and multi-year conversations with brand owners. We're also seeing category participation broaden well beyond early adopter brand owners or brand owner organizations, signaling more mainstream and more mainstream brand owner level confidence in the space. What this means is that women's sport now requires clearer strategy and sharper expectations. As the category matures, brand owners need to move beyond pilot logic and one-off experimentation. Sustained investment, differentiated activation, and clear performance assessment become essential as scale increases. In other words, women's sport should now be approached as this with the same commercial discipline and accountability applied to other established sponsorship platforms within a brand owner's portfolio. That would be trend number 7. Trend number 8. Brand-to-brand collaboration formalizes within sponsorship systems. As sponsorship platforms concentrate, we're seeing, particularly at those large platform scale, we're seeing shift to how brands collaborate within them. Co-sponsor collaboration is becoming more intentional and more structured rather than purely opportunistic. Within shared sponsorship environments by different brand owners and different brands are increasingly looking to unlock incremental value through shared audiences, efficiencies, and combined activation that broadens reach and broadens impact. This reflects a broader move towards collaboration as a way to do more with concentrated platforms, with potentially more efficient spend on resources. It also introduces new complexity that needs to be managed deliberately. This space is a different kind of governance requirement, but certainly is important to be aware of. We're seeing this play out clearly in practice. Brand-to-brand collaboration is becoming more common within sponsorship environments, with a growing number of programs involving 2 or more activating brands across one rights holder or one property. However, execution friction remains high. Brand owners consistently cite partner identification, role clarity, governance, and measurement as the main barriers to success. While interest has increased, formalization has lagged. Few collaborations are governed by standardized frameworks, standardized and consistent KPIs, or commercial models. So the incidence of collaboration is rising faster than the structure required to make it scalable and repeatable. What this means is that collaboration shifts from opportunistic to operational. Without clear objectives, governance, and measurement, brand-to-brand partnerships tend to underdeliver despite the best of intent. When structured properly, however, collaboration becomes a multiplier within concentrated sponsorship ecosystems. The difference is not creativity, but clarity in roles, ownership, and how success is defined and evaluated. What we do consistently see in this space is the risk where one brand winds up carrying more of the lift than the other brand in a collaboration model around a sponsorship, and potentially over-investing or potentially not having an awareness of, going back to the KPI notion, about what success looks like, and for what we are putting in, are we getting commensurate value back from the collaboration? Our trend number 9, fan first, community-led models that reshape value creation. We're seeing a clear shift in how sponsorship value is being defined. Increasingly, sponsorships are assessed not just on exposure, but on depth of participation, advocacy, and community, and the community they create. That speaks back to a number of other trends around activation value. It speaks to expectations on omni-channel integration. Both brand owners and rights holders are placing greater emphasis on direct first-party relationships with fans. That focus reflects a broader move away from one-way messaging toward engagement models that create repeat interaction and identifiable audiences for both rights holders and brand owners alike. Rights holders are increasingly prioritizing owned audiences and direct engagement. Many leagues, teams, properties at large are investing in membership programs, apps, and owned databases, with growth in owned audiences now tracked alongside attendance and viewership as a metric that rights holders or sophisticated rights holders are tracking against. Marketing research consistently shows that active participation and community involvement correlate more strongly with loyalty and advocacy than with passive exposure does. At the same time, brand investment is experiential and participatory. At the same time, brand investment in experiential and participatory activation continues to rise, particularly formats that enable opt-in engagement rather than one-way communication. So when you're thinking about your asset mix in particular properties, think about your objectives would be an obvious comment, but are we buying visibility assets, or are we buying experiential assets? And if we don't have an awareness problem, do we need as many visibility assets as we used to? Should we be investing from a balance perspective in symmetry in more experiential-led assets? What this means is that value creation in sponsorship is no longer limited to reach and awareness, and hasn't been for a long time. Brand owners need to consider how partnerships contribute to deeper audience relationships over time. Sponsorship is a long game investment. That doesn't replace traditional metrics, but it reframes how sponsorships are evaluated alongside other marketing communication channels. The emphasis shifts towards durability, how programs build participation, advocacy, and long-term brand equity within the context of sponsorship. We are amazing on time today. I'm speaking quickly. Hopefully, I'm landing things effectively. Trend number 10. This is putting the mirror back on us a little bit and our industry colleagues in the intermediary space. Intermediary differentiation shifts towards IP and decision enablement. We, as a sponsored consultancy working brand side only, are an intermediary, and things have shifted quickly and are continuing to shift over the last few years. So hopefully this is some insight in how you work with your external partners. What we're seeing here is pressure moving up the value chain. Automation, AI, and optimization are compressing low-value service layers across marketing from agency partners, consultancies, and others. As a result, execution alone is no longer a sufficient source of differentiation for intermediaries like us. Brand owners are increasingly expecting partners to bring insight, decision frameworks, operating models, and proprietary IP that help them navigate complexity and not just deliver work. Across the market, service delivery is becoming more standardized. As tools and processes converge, it's harder for execution alone to create meaningful differentiation for an intermediary. At the same time, brand owners increasingly value partners that help them prioritize, help them compare, help them defend investment decisions, especially where trade-offs span markets, channels, or objectives, which creates additional complexity. That shift is driving greater investment by intermediaries like us in benchmarks, in data stacks, in systems, and in decision support frameworks that improve speed, improve confidence, and improve consistency for brand owners. What this means is that differentiation increasingly comes from decision enablement, not delivery volume. Brand owners benefit most from partners that bring repeatable IP, credible benchmarks, and tools that improve confidence and consistency in complex sponsorship decisions. Execution still matters, of course, but it's no longer sufficient on its own. The role of intermediaries shifts towards helping brand owners prioritize, defend, and optimize investments across markets, across platforms, and across objectives and service objectives. So that is our 10 trends for 2026. So what does that mean from a direction of travel for us as brand owner decision makers? What all this adds up to is increasing leadership what this all adds up to is rising leadership expectations around sponsorship performance. As optimization pressure increases, that pressure concentrates less on strategy choice and more on execution and on governance and on clarity. Measurement and data increasingly determine how defensible sponsorship decisions are at key moments, those being renewals, those being reallocations, and those being trade-offs with other channels, not just within the sponsorship envelope. We're also seeing portfolio design matter more than individual deal selection. How assets work together is shaping outcomes as much as any single partnership does. And finally, sponsorship is now judged alongside other marketing communications channels. For a long while, it got a pass because there was emotion, there was layers of complexity that were tough to sort through. That has shifted to this era of optimization where we are now being judged as sponsorship marketeers against other communications channels with comparable expectations around accountability and performance. Well, that's where we'll leave it from a trends perspective. Our goal today was to surface how expectations around sponsorship are changing. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. It is 39 minutes past the hour. We're out about 10 minutes early, but thank you for your time. As I said, look in your email boxes towards the end of the week for a link to a recording, a playback of this content. Look for a link to the audio through Spotify. Look for a written version of the report, and look for a copy of the Lumen CWFA sponsorship industry report that we published in December, co-published with the World Federation of Advertisers. Thank you for your time. I know it's valuable. We appreciate you spending some time, some of it with us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, rest of your evening, or the rest of your tomorrow, depending where you are in the world. But thanks for your time today, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thank you.